Time to recover some history. With Lord of the Rings. No, not that one. Not that one either. Not right now. I'm talking about the one my generation grew up with because it was pretty much all we had. This story's all but lost to the Grey Havens by now. But in the dark heart of the 1970s, one man with a dream managed to do what was previously thought impossible. Make a Lord of the Rings movie. His name was and is Ralph Bakshi. Then as now, he was most well known as the director of the X-rated cartoon morality play Fritz the Cat. But he was, and to the best of my knowledge still is, also a Lord of the Rings OG, who was trying to get someone interested in adapting the trilogy from the moment he started working in animation in the middle 50s. Fritz was Bakshi's directorial debut, and rather than follow it up by cranking out sequels until his soul died, the way some people wanted, he followed it up with his own epic fantasy adventure film about the birth of a new age, midwifed by a titanic war against an evil sorcerer. A little movie called Wizards. No, not that kind, though there is more than a little thematic overlap. Like a lot of films before and since, Wizards ran out of money near the end of its production, forcing Bakshi to construct his climax out of bits of other films. But in order to keep things as aesthetically unified as possible, he had his animators draw over the stock footage with a process that's still called rotoscoping, even though most of the animators work in CGI these days. And this, Bakshi says on the Wizards DVD commentary, showed him how to do Lord of the Rings. Epic fantasy adventure films were at least 10 years in Hollywood's past by that point. But a new power was rising. Its victory was at hand, thanks to that other 1977 epic fantasy adventure film about the birth of a new age, midwifed by a titanic war against an evil sorcerer. Which also starred Mark Hamill, who flitted back and forth between sets since they were both filmed at the same time, for the same studio. Both ran out of money at the same time, forcing both directors to go hat in hand back to their studio overlords. And both were told, hey, you guys asked for all those toy rights and back-end deals, why don't you pay for it your damn self? Reinforcing both directors' pre-existing distrust of the studio system. It's funny how history works sometimes. So after one of those two 20th Century Fox films proved to be an excuse to print money, everybody figured Star Wars was just another fad. It'll blow over once the sequel inevitably disappointed everyone. Like they always did. Well, except for Godfather Part 2 and Bride of Frankenstein and, well, hell, pick a James Bond movie that isn't Dr. No, because almost everybody does. But nope, none of those count. Sequels always suck, right? Right. Might as well flood the market before the wave rolls back. Hell, why not give the Fritz the Cat guy $4 million? Let's see what he can do. We know the hippies will go to it, right? And besides, United Artists was already planning to do a single film adaptation of Lord of the Rings, written and directed by John Boorman. And once Bakshi got wind of that, he convinced UA to pay Boorman off. The idea of condensing the Holy Trilogy down to one film, no matter how epic its length, seemed like complete and utter blasphemy. It'd be like stretching The Hobbit out into 3 films just because your studio's used to an annual billion-dollar cash injection. Or splitting the concluding movie in an ongoing series into 2 for that same reason. Crazy ideas, right? What kind of perverted, money-grubbing vampires would dare do such a thing? Have to be a complete pack of fools. Well, chew on this, true believers. Somewhere out there, in the infinite vastness of the multiverse, there's an Earth where the first Lord of the Rings movie came to us from the writer-director of Zardoz. The ring is good. The penis is evil. Oh God. Can you imagine them trying to translate that into Orcish? Of course, the first one coming to us from the writer-director of Fritz the Cat really isn't any less weird when you think about it. But the first thing Bakshi did was hire the last unicorn's own, Peter S. Beagle, to whip the script back into something like its original shape, and that makes perfect sense. Two Lord of the Rings fans are always better than one. But as with wizards, money woes and basic breakdowns in human communication dogged this picture from the start. Chief among the latter was the studio's inability to understand why this trilogy's a trilogy in the first place. It's not just because Tolkien's publisher was afraid that if they printed the whole thing in one massive block, nobody'd be able to afford it. It's also because, if you crack open any of those 3 books, you'll quickly find the series actually contains 6. Seems tailor-made for the franchise-obsessed Hollywood of today. But getting the Hollywood of 1978 interested in even 2 pictures required a whole lot of sweet-talking and a whole lot of penny-pinching. And it shows. More so than Beagle's contributions, to tell the truth, because our writer did the noble thing and tried to use as much of Tolkien's actual dialogue as possible. Like the best kind of nobility, this sows the seeds of its own downfall, because Tolkien did a lot of his best work in descriptive prose, like a certain other early 20th century author we just talked about. And the higher up you climb on Middle-earth's social ladder, the more dialogue purposefully resembles medieval epics. It's hard for anybody to make all that sound natural all the time, even if you're not just dealing with anybody, you're dealing with John motherfucking Hurt. Really, that's an oft-overlooked part of Tolkien's whole point, that the English language lacks a proper tradition of epic storytelling, and therefore lacks the epic stories to give it life. We just stole a bunch from other cultures to make up the difference. A practice that all of England's colonies continue to this day, especially in America, where we like to get pissy and defensive when anybody calls us on it. I'm going to go ahead and assume a plot synopsis of a Lord of the Rings film is completely unnecessary. So let's get to the real meat of the issue. Why wasn't this the Star Wars United Artists was looking for? False advertising's the #1 reason on my list. This is not the decompressed extended edition of the trilogy that some people would go on to make after they saw this as a young man and were disappointed by it. But it is, unfortunately, a species of condensed Cliff Notes Lord of the Rings. Maybe not as condensed as what Borman was going to make, but the sad fact is, this thing cuts off right after the Battle of Helm's Deep. It says Lord of the Rings on the box, but really, it's the abridged version of Fellowship and about half of Two Towers. United Artists feared that no one in their right mind would pay full price to see half a movie, which seems an absurdly naive thought these days. But if people paid full price and then left disappointed in the fact they'd only seen half a movie, well, caveat emptor, am I right? Which is Latin for, your money is now our money, and we will spend it on drugs. Or more James Bond movies. You know, whatever. So what did they change, and what did they leave out? Are the questions most good hobbits ask. Change? Not too terribly much. Less than Jackson did, really. But leave out? You mean apart from the entire third act? No matter what story you're telling, it better have a climax, a denouement, some falling action, and a fucking conclusion. Bakshi knew all of this, of course. It's not his fault the studio double-crossed him after he made them back 7 times the amount of money he gave them. None of that changes the fact this thing cuts itself off right as it's getting to the good part, with little more than some triumphant music and a voiceover. So it's no wonder people left disappointed. Like later adaptations, it begins with a voiceover as well. Not from Galadriel, though. I'm not actually sure who this is at the beginning. Elrond does some work later on, and Gandalf narrates his escape from Isengard. But already we see a major issue with this film. Consistency. It's nice to have. Especially when you're introducing a whole new fantasy world to an audience that might be actively hostile to the very idea of fantasy worlds in the first place. I suspect that's why, rather than open in the Shire, we open with the One Ring's forging at the end of the Second Age. Its loss after the big battle, how it twisted and mutilated the person Smeagol into the creature Gollum, and its eventual fall into the hands of one Bilbo Baggins. All of this is told in silhouette for reasons that could be artistic, Could be budgetary. Only your director knows for sure. And I'm holding off on listening to his commentary until I finish this. While it does hit every major story beat in the book and a half it depicts, a ton of stuff gets condensed down to all hell. And there are the inevitable cuts. Like later adaptations, this one shafts Tom Bombadil in order to make room for a wizard fight. But unlike later adaptations, it also shafts Merry and Pippin. They just kind of appear on the road with Sam and Frodo, in one of the clearest cases of tell don't show storytelling. Something Tolkien himself struggled with. The trip from Moria to Lorien is one hard jump cut, especially after we just had what's supposed to be the big emotional moment with Gandalf's not death. I'm not saying you need 4 minutes of slow motion crying as the camera spins around everybody, but still, you need a little bit more than just boom, Lothlorien. And on the flip side of that, the foot chase across the fields of Rohan gets dragged out to an absurd degree. Yes, even compared with that other Two Towers movie. But hey, at least we get to hear the tale of Beren and Luthien straight from the once and future king's mouth, without recourse to buying an extended edition extra expensive DVD. It's not all bad. Backgrounds are universally gorgeous, of course. Bakshi was a stickler for that, as seen in any random still from any of his other films. Character designs, on the other hand, are all over the damn place. The distracting regularity of their fluctuations leads to many a moment where I'm pulled right the hell out of this story. And would be even if I hadn't been reading, hearing, and seeing versions of it over and over again since I was 5. Partly, I suspect that's because our director was too busy making what amounted to his first live-action feature to sweat all of the small stuff. But mostly, it's the inherent downside of rotoscoping. It only sounds like a foolproof plan in the abstract. How can our animators possibly go off-model if there's a real-life human being serving as the model right there in the fucking frame? Well, you try to get 600 animators to do the same thing at the same time. Never mind trying to get them all to draw the same thing the same way. Disney only got away with it for as long as they did by treating everyone like replaceable parts in a machine. And even that started to wear on them by the 70s. Even the levels of rotoscoping vary from scene to scene, and they decrease in tandem with a character's importance. So our 4 hobbits are, as you might expect, always animated. I'd even say over-animated in the case of poor Samwise. Whereas, say, the Rohirrim, who rescue Merry and Pippin from the Uruk-hai, look like they've been half-traced by drunken inkers. Monster designs suffer as well, becoming either hilariously ugly, and not in a good way, or obscured to the point of non-existence. The decision to make the Balrog in Moria a dude with a lion head and bat wings was not the best. No amount of forced perspective can really help him. I mean, what the fuck is the point of animation if you can't say, oh, I don't know, make your Balrog the size of King Kong and give him a face like the Red Bull? No, not that one. The one from Last Unicorn. The only Red Bull in my heart, god damn it. I don't drink taurine. Ugh. And there's some crazy people out there who contaminate perfectly good vodka with that stuff. Just, no. The evil powers of Mordor seem confined to making the background go all expressionistic, whether Frodo's wearing the ring or not. And try your best not to be distracted by how often characters' feet seem to float above whatever they're supposed to be standing on. Though now that I've mentioned it, I'm afraid you're never going to be able to unsee it. Hell, I'm afraid most of you are going to be distracted enough just by hearing John Hurt's voice come out of a face that looks like it came off an old silver dollar. And that just opens up a whole other can of nitpicky little production design complaints. Like, how come most of the men of Middle-earth run around without pants? Hell, ride horses without pants. It's like this production went to Spain specifically so they could raid the old costume stores of all of those Italian-Spanish sword and sandal co-productions from the 50s and 60s. Though I'm pretty sure they went to Spain so they could find horses that could dance for the camera. And by the way, if the Rohirrim are supposed to be Vikings of the Great Grass Sea, how come the men of Gondor get to rock the horned helmets? And how come Saruman's in red? If you're not going to give him his coat of many colors, then you might as well just leave him in white. It's all colors combined anyway, and it contrasts well with his growing interior darkness. And what the hell's up with everyone dropping the S from his name half the time? Ahriman sounds at least 50% less evil without that opening sibilant. Not that the voice acting's bad. For the most part, it's aight. But that's the most I can say about it. Then again, I've been spoiled by a whole generation of voice directors who jam their whole cast into a room rather than jamming each individual actor into their own booth. Acting is reacting, after all. And not to sound like a snob, he said, lying, but you really can hear the difference after you've heard it often enough. So with all that said, I think I'm starting to realize why this thing's all but slipped down the memory hole. Time has made it more of a historical artifact than a movie. Really, it was never much more than half a movie to begin with. And so it slipped into a weird middle ground. It's neither as beloved as Rankin Bass's Hobbit, or as despised as Peter Jackson's. Even in its own time, it was almost immediately overshadowed by a made-for-TV not sequel that everybody pretty much treated like a sequel anyway. I certainly know I did at age 5 when I found it, even though I immediately wondered, why the hell do character designs keep changing between movies? That's not how this is supposed to work. As for this thing, though, hell, give it a shot. I'm genuinely interested in what y'all might make of it. Next up, Return of the King. No, not that one, the other one.